This is the Nations Conspire channel. Welcome to today's show. If you haven't heard, Donald Trump met with the South African president in regards to these stories about how Donald Trump is bringing in white South Africans into America. And of course, this is all about the race war, but I don't want to go into more detail about that. What I want to do is take this as a learning opportunity for you to share this video with other people, because the headlines that are out there all say the same thing: how the White House orchestrated Trump's Oval Office ambush of the South African president. And if we can get people to start looking at the news for what it really is, which is a scripted repetition that is fed to these news anchors, all given the same talking points, the same exact scripts, whether it's Fox News or it's ABC News, they're fed a left and right script. All the liberal media gets the same script. Nobody goes, how come they're all using the same talking points, but this person's on CNN, that person's on CBS, that person is on MSNBC, and it's all happening in the same exact day? Because the news is a scripted form of mind control. You've probably heard people use the term scripted reality and never understood what it means. Unless you're a longtime subscriber of the work that I've put out there, then you obviously know what it means. A scripted reality is blurring your lines of what's real and what's not. The news is scripted. These events that are happening are scripted events. And what this does is this keeps people in thinking of terms of the left and the right, their hatred for Donald Trump versus their hatred for Barack Obama or Joe Biden, their hatred for the opposite political party, instead of looking at the news as to what its real purpose is. Its real purpose is to use basic mind control on the masses through repetition. And you tell me how all these different news stations all get the same exact script that uses the same exact words, and we've seen this over and over and over again, because they don't expect you to catch it. And if you do catch it, they want you to just call legacy media scripted instead of saying all of it is scripted. And the purpose of it being scripted is to blur your lines of what reality really is and get you all ignited in a fury about what these politicians are doing, whether they're on your team or they're not on your team, in the perspective of Republican and Democrat. But the reality is none of them are on your team. They're manipulating you by putting stories like this out there using the same terminology. And of course, the moral of the story with Donald Trump and the South African president, the moral of that entire story, like I covered in a previous video, is Donald Trump bringing in white South Africans, but deporting all of these people in America who have families, who have children, who have been here their entire lives, and they're getting thrown out, sent to Honduras prisons, right? And all that does is ignite this race war, what they want to keep you trapped in. If you haven't seen this clip aired, okay? And keep in mind, every one of these news stations, because most people don't go, hey, you know, these people are journalists, we're told, right? So you would think in your mind that a journalist has a pen and paper in front of them, or a laptop, or an iPad, whatever, and they're taking down their notes before they go on the air, right? But they're all using the same exact terminology, which tells you what? It tells you that some man behind the curtain feeds these scripts to these people, and they pretend to be journalists and reporters, and their job is to suck you into the political hypnosis that they've created. Because as long as they can keep the people divided, they can continue to strip us of our rights and work us and divide us so that eventually they could gain more control over us. If you haven't seen this ambush clip, this is what aired all in one day across of what they call legacy media.
To the dramatic scene in the Oval Office today, the tense confrontation, President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
Up next, another Oval Office meltdown, President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
President Trump is being accused of conducting something of a diplomatic ambush of South Africa's president in the Oval Office.
To be with you, I'm Katie Tur. President Trump orchestrated another Oval Office ambush today.
Today, Donald Trump meeting with the president of South Africa and attempting to ambush and humiliate that leader.
Zelensky territory, where essentially he was a bit ambushed inside the Oval Office.
Felt like an ambush in there, kind of like the President Zelensky meeting in the Oval Office.
This was an ambush. It was orchestrated.
Cyril Ramaphosa brought his best diplomatic self to this meeting, but nothing could have prepared him for this multimedia ambush.
It started as, to some degree, an ambush.
Well, Katie, I mean, it wasn't ambush.
Ambush.
Ambushed.
Ambush.
An ambush.
Ambushing.
Ambush.
So if you haven't heard, it was an ambush. All right, right? The only people being ambushed are the American people who are falling for this, who are going to go out and repeat the same talking points, because that's the point. They hear ambush, ambush, ambush. Then they talk to their friend who's into politics. They go and get a beer at happy hour. They're standing at work, probably wearing their COVID mask still. And they say, did you see how he ambushed him? He wouldn't have done that if he wasn't a black man from South Africa. He wouldn't have done that to Putin or somebody else, right? Because they get sucked into this. I'm sure you all recall the Sinclair Broadcasting Group and the threat to our democracy, right? Because that's become a common theme. Threat to our democracy. They've convinced people that MAGA conservative people are a threat to democracy. But the reality is that Donald Trump and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, whoever it's led by at the current time, whether it was Biden or Obama, they're all the threat to democracy. But they want you to think that your neighbors, your friend who lives a few houses down, who has a Trump flag in his lawn, is a threat to democracy, even though he goes to work 7 days a week and puts food on the table for his family because he thinks differently, they tell you. Because they want you to think and stereotype your next door neighbor or anybody out there who thinks differently than you do, and then say that they're a threat to democracy. They're molding the minds of everyone. Here's those clips again from the Sinclair Broadcasting Group for old time's sake.
Sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Right, and those are easy things to look at to say that the news is a scripted reality, that all these people are reading off of the same exact script. So no matter where you are and getting fed your news, then you're going to repeat the same exact talking points. And now we're at a point where people use the threat to democracy sentence. You hear it all of the time, and nobody realizes that both parties are a threat to democracy, because democracy doesn't really exist anymore in America. Not that it ever actually did, and it was supposed to be a republic from the first place. But the news is here to control our thoughts, and it's so simple for people to see if they just see the patterns. When you see repetition, when it's shown to you like that, it starts breaking your mind free. Let's take another example. Donald Trump, the entire charade of the assassination attempt. What was the purpose of it? Well, there's multiple purposes, right? How many more people went and voted? How many more people consented to be governed? How many people don't even know what that is? You have to consent to be governed by these people. You have to give them consent, and your consent is your vote to allow them to rule over you, to go into their system, their tax system, their control system, to tell you have to have this ID versus that ID. You have to have this to travel now. You got to get on a plane. You got to have our ID. Got to get everything online digitally. The consent to be governed. And what was the other thing that was important in all of that? Well, yoking up Donald Trump with Christianity. Nobody thought back in 2016 of any comparison of Donald Trump being this Christian savior, not until the assassination attempt. Now, why is that? Why was it his first term? Nobody was saying, well, Donald Trump is an amazing Christian. Donald Trump is a follower of Christ. How come it wasn't until right before the last fake election? Because that's what they told you. That was the script that they implanted in your mind. Because of things like what I'm about to show you. After the assassination attempt, every single member of the conservative media, every famous alt-right head, every famous person who is considered a conservative, we're all talking off the same script. Divine intervention, and program people into what we see now. This obsession with Donald Trump, this absolute psychosis that they're living in, thinking that Donald Trump was anointed by God himself, not even realizing how blasphemous this is to go out there and declare that a human being was chosen by God to save America. But that's because of this repetition you're about to see here. This is where we transformed from Donald Trump just being a conservative who was going to go against the Democratic Party to Donald Trump being looked at as the golden calf, as being an idol. Here are the clips from the alt-right media. And keep in mind, the repetition. This is how they got those seeds planted in people's minds that Donald Trump is some type of Christian prophet who is here and chosen by God to save America.
The devil came to Pennsylvania holding a rifle, but an American lion got back up on his feet and he roared!
You don't get slight grazes to the ear. I mean, that is divine intervention, that he was not, mortally wounded.
Fate stepped in, God, the hand of God, call it whatever you like.
Evil came for the man we admire and love. I thank God that his hand was on President Trump.
The fact that this is about milliseconds and millimeters that changes this from being an attempt and an assassination should really talk about the divine intervention that has occurred here.
Trump is truly blessed by the hand of God, being able to evade being assassinated.
And we thank him for protecting our next president, Donald J. Trump.
It was a clear assassination attempt. I think there was maybe some divine intervention.
If you didn't believe in miracles before Saturday, you better be believing right now.
It was God alone who prevented the unthinkable from happening.
So that was truly divine intervention as far as I'm concerned.
It's having everybody on the internet saying this is divine intervention. Every frame of the attempted assassination is nothing short of proof that it was divine intervention.
We מסתכל on President Trump. God must have been watching down on the president.
I personally believe that God intervened today, not just on behalf of President Trump, but on behalf of our country.
I'll say that, in my opinion, probably the most famous NFL catch in history is called the Immaculate Reception. I call this the Immaculate Protection. I believe that there was divine intervention to make sure nothing happened to this man. It's extraordinary.
But let's just be real. Donald Trump is anointed by God. Whether you believe in God or not, he had a divine intervention that saved his life. And you can call me crazy, but I think that's the only thing that truly saved Donald Trump. And now he's going to have more support than he's ever had.
Willie, you're right. He's been posting on his Truth Social account. Here's his latest post. It came in just moments ago. Thank you to everyone for your thoughts and prayers yesterday. It was God alone, he said, who prevented the unthinkable from happening. We will fear not, but instead remain resilient in our faith and defiant in the face of wickedness.
Well, when God shows up that clearly, it's hard for even the biggest detractors to deny it. They go, what did I just watch? You just watched God turn Donald Trump's head, literally. We all just watched it. I mean, think about God making his presence known. I mean, on the biggest possible story you ever could. Now you've got people going, okay, I believe it. I believe it.
And that right there was the clip that started breeding the psychosis of people and what we're seeing now. This obsession with the shot with Donald Trump holding his ear, pumping his fist. All of those images and things that you kept hearing are how they form this perception in people's minds. The news, the repetition, the pattern, programming. That's why they call it programming. And what's the other thing that we keep hearing about? The biggest threat to global health is what? Climate change. Isn't it a coincidence we constantly hear about climate change and all the people attached to it are the same people who are attached to COVID and attached to getting you vaccinated and want to suck carbon out of the air? People like Bill Gates who have books how to avoid a climate disaster. Now, why do you think all of this propaganda is out there now? Because so many people have woken up by just looking up government documents, right? Weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather in 2025, figuring out the NextRad towers, the HARP towers, what the 5G towers really can do, seeing patents like hurricane and tornado control devices, or the hundreds of patents that I've shown over the years where you could go through it and you could see weather modification methods, right? But then there's articles out there telling you that there's no such thing as weather modification. But people are becoming suspicious because of the stuff you're seeing right now. 70 tornadoes hitting this state every day. Tornadoes hitting the same exact spots, almost like they're targeted areas. So what does the media have to do so you don't get suspicious to the truths about weather modification, because they can't control everything on the internet with their algorithm yet, but eventually they'll be imprisoning you if you start talking about weather modification. Well, what do? They put stories like I covered a couple of weeks ago, once in a generation storm, right? Telling you that every day it's a once in a generation storm. Why would you think they'd be doing that? Because they don't want you to get suspicious as to how bizarre these weather patterns are, how all of a sudden the jet stream doesn't exist and these storms are going in the opposite direction of what we were once told was science, right? Because they want you to believe, well, it has to do with climate change. That's why we could just do all these crazy weather events can happen and they could be unexplained to you because we'll just say it's climate change, right? Tornadoes just going in circles around specific areas, wiping out people's homes, killing people, devastating people. And then, of course, barely covering it on the news. The reason that they do that and have to do that and use terms like once in a generation storm is because it programs your mind into thinking that, well, this is a rare event. Oh, this isn't just happening. This is just a rare thing. It's a once in a generation storm. It's not. And then a month later, they do it again. And 2 months later, they do it again. And they just keep using terms like once in a generation storm because it just programs you into thinking it's just a coincidental thing and that there's no real conspiracy behind it because weather modification isn't real. Here they are just telling you about these once in a generation storm to program you into thinking that this is something to do with climate change. Don't be suspicious about weather modification. Don't worry about it, folks. And then 2 months from now, we'll just tell you again, it's a once in a generation storm.
Authorities are calling a multi-day life-threatening storm across multiple states, from Texas all the way up to Michigan and then moving east. The National Weather Service tonight warning millions to prepare for this. This system already triggering violent weather. But the main line of storms and potential tornadoes hit after dark tonight and then days of heavy rain and life-threatening flooding. Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z, she's live in the storm zone with the forecast in a moment, but ABC's Victor Akendo here with the images already. He's in Paducah, Kentucky tonight.
Tonight, a dangerous and potentially deadly multi-day severe weather outbreak is underway. Families in the heartland bracing for dangerous tornadoes and flooding so extreme, the National Weather Service is calling it a once-in-a-generation weather event.
A once-in-a-generation flood event and tornado outbreak is setting up across the lower Mississippi and Ohio valleys this week.
Portions of the Midwest and South are in the bullseye of what forecasters fear could be a generational storm.
Forecasts are warning of a once-in-a-generation storm.
Experts are calling the rare combination of tornadoes and flooding a once-in-a-generation event. As ABC's Rena Roy reports, this is expected to last for several days.
At least one person was killed after tornadoes hit parts of the South and the Midwest. And this is part of what some forecasters are calling a once-in-a-generation storm.
About severe storms and tornadoes causing extensive damage in the Midwest and the South. And now forecasters are warning of a once-in-a-generation storm.
Forecasters are warning that this storm system could be a once-in-a-generation event. It won't be done for days.
Amid what the National Weather Service termed a once-in-a-generation flooding event.
So the National Weather Service says areas most at risk could see more than 15 inches of rain over the course of the storm, further warning of the possibility of, quote, generational flooding.
A once-in-a-generation extreme weather event slamming millions of people with a rare combination of tornadoes and catastrophic flooding expected to hit the same areas of the heartland.
These are two of the worst case scenarios happening at the same time for the same cities.
And all those examples there are examples of mind control, because the key to mind control is repetition. And the more you hear these talking points, the more your mind, whether you're consciously doing it or subconsciously doing it, is picking up the talking points. Ambush, threat to our democracy, divine intervention with Donald Trump, once in a generation storm. It programs you without you realizing you're being programmed. So that when you talk to somebody about these insane tornadoes that we're seeing, a lot of them are just going, well, it's once in a generation. Aren't you noticing that it's happening every single day? Well, it's climate change, right? They're putting stuff like out there, using repetition on a day in, day out basis with every single story so you don't get suspicious of what they're actually doing. And you go back and you look at the first story I showed you, ambush, right? And you would just think a common person, when they saw that clip, would use common sense and just say, okay, you got a news anchor on CNN, you got a news anchor on ABC, you got a news anchor on MSNBC, you got a news anchor on regular NBC, You got CBS, you got all of them. And they're all saying this exact same word. Did they all in their head just say, this is an ambush, this is an ambush, this is an ambush? No, they got fed that line. So then you should say, well, who's feeding them these scripts? And why are they using the same exact scripts? Aren't they supposed to be investigative journalists? No, they're not. They're programmers. Brought to you by the Tavistock Institute of Social Engineering. Their job is to social engineer, behavioral control. And right now what you're seeing is the behavioral control of the left and right paradigm, keeping you stuck in their political game so that you stay divided, so that you don't realize that your government's the one who's really ambushing you. And they're ambushing your mind, and they've ambushed the weather, and they've done other things beyond comprehension, like ambushed our way of life by taking people's jobs and telling them if they didn't go and get a vax, that they wouldn't be allowed to work again. They've ambushed everything. But as long as you stay divided, they can continue to ambush. And until people stop looking at the people on the news as journalists because of the way they talk, which is how they're trained to speak on the news. They sound trustworthy. They sound intelligent. They speak with a certain tone to their voice. That's all part of the manipulation process. See, part of the problem is that most people don't believe that mind control is real. And a perfect example to use when it comes to mind control is to thinking about a song on the radio. Think about a song on the radio. Maybe you'll hear Katy Perry, right? And you go, this song is awful. And you hear it again. Then you're at Walmart and you hear it again. And you hear it 15 times. And suddenly you're in the shower singing the song. And suddenly you might even like the song, but you don't want to tell your friends because it's embarrassing, right? But you find yourself singing, Dark Horse by Katy Perry. Well, that's because of the repetition, the amount of times you hear it. You start hearing it and hearing it and hearing it. It gets stuck in your head. It's a form of sorcery and witchcraft. That's what repetition is, and that's what the news is. So all these stories out there, think about what I showed you. Everybody remembers the threat to democracy, the ambush story, right, which is fueling the race war, how Donald Trump ambushed that man because that's a black man from South Africa who's coming to the White House, who's responsible for white genocide. I mean, these are the narratives that they want out there to keep us divided. What easier narrative to keep us divided than race, right, and gender, right? Or Donald Trump. Nobody thought of Donald Trump as being side by side with Jesus Christ until every single mainstream media news outlet after the fake assassination attempt wasn't questioning the validity of that assassination attempt and how a DARPA smart bullet, if the deep state wanted him dead, would have killed him instantly, or how some kid who looks like, he couldn't even tie his own shoes outsmarted the Secret Service. And of course, everybody out there just goes, well, that's because they told him to stand down, right? They wouldn't have missed him with any type of government military weapon, okay, if the deep state was behind it, which of course they were behind it. They were behind the whole setup, including that photograph, which started the psychosis into the Trump worship. And then every single person out there who is a conservative talking about how God intervened, how God chose Trump to save America, how it was divine intervention, all the way down to the basic stuff you're now hearing on the news every day with these bizarre weather patterns that should make people suspicious. Well, it's once in a lifetime, because your brain's not going to remember in 6 months when the government puts all this stuff out again and talks about a once in a lifetime event. Or eventually they're going to tell you a 9/11 like weather event, because that's what they're planning. A weather event that could destroy an entire city and then get you on board with climate laws so that we suddenly change the way that we live, just like we had to do in 2021. And you're told to lock yourself inside more because you're the carbon emission that they're trying to control. Every single story that is out there to manipulate you into their control system. Break free from the programming. None of these people are journalists. None of these people are your friend. None of these people who claim to have your best interest do. And nobody should have ever given these psychopaths their consent to be governed. But unfortunately, when people see this stuff, they still will get pulled into it. Ambush. Oh, yeah, he ambushed. And they'll repeat it like a sheeple does. And then on the other side, the conservative media will go, oh, look at the fake legacy media, right? Not realizing, just like I showed you that clip from the Republican news talking about divine intervention. It's the same exact thing. Programming you on one side, programming you on the other side. But they refuse to see it because they actually prefer to be stuck in this left-right paradigm because they feel hopeless. But they shouldn't feel hopeless because they shouldn't be putting their trust in man. They should be putting their trust in God. I thank everybody for being here. Hope this video is something you could share to help wake people up. God bless all of you and your families, as always.